Don't fear the Reaper. I think we can all agree by now that at some point in time, who knows how many years it was when it started progressing, but this kind of fungal infection spread through the psyche of the world and dropped us into this state of what I can only describe as like liminality. The world became inclined to such a, a vertical progression of expectation that evolution stopped dead in its tracks in a lot of ways, and the world just stagnated into being this repetitive routine of running on a treadmill that keeps you perpetually subservient to the structure of civilization and practically gives you like nothing in return. No matter where you go, what you do, everybody just is kind of miserable, aren't they? You know, it's not the first time this kind of circumstance has transpired in the world throughout history. Um, you got to come to the conclusion that civilization and the way we perpetuate and build civilization and the models of how we try to put this level of progression to a fully automated system that makes our lives simplified progresses in a direction where the pace of this machine architecture overtakes human reason, human purpose, and life itself kind of fades from the resolve as to what there is to do and why is there a reason to continue in this experience. We replaced meaning and purpose with a mechanical architecture that turns us into a component in a machine. Why do we do this as a species to ourselves? What is it that's inherently inlaid in our mind and our psyche that we build and craft these mass spanning temples of decadence, these towers of Babel that instead of going vertical have just been splayed over the world, that inevitably and continuously perpetuate more misery and suffering than what they're worth, and inevitably erode and destroy us as a species, poison our own well, ruin the human genome, disconnect us from the world that's inherently and intrinsically holding all of this and providing the space for this to even transpire. When we poison that world, then we need to sustain ourselves. Well, there are a couple theories, but I think the easiest kind of speculation as to, just being real about it. Life inherently comes with this principle of dualism that plays out through the human psyche. Everything is seen through a pathology of right, wrong, good, bad, good outcome, bad outcome. And we try to fix and mend the problems, or what we see as problems in life, by using our ability to manipulate the elements of the earth to make tools and things like that, to make life seem on the surface a little more bearable, a little more tolerable, a little less primordial. But in so doing that, for every problem we solve, we create and bring into the world another set of issues. And we slowly build this kind of structure out of the architecture of our own inability to comprehend, the hubris in what we do. We perpetuate and build a template upon the world that already exists in a natural way and provides, or has the capacity to provide and sustain the very bare necessities of what we need to exist in it. It comes down to the preservation of the body and the way that we do it, Admittedly, the human species sees the reflection of what it is as something that needs to be preserved. But all we are, ever, all that any being that walks this planet is ever, is an embodiment, of a kind of animated principle of life that exists for a period of time and then returns to the elements. And we have all kinds of different symbols and ideas and principles and religious teachings and all these things that, describe life, give paths through life, give ideas of what life is, give ideas of what death is, and nothing can really be rooted in certainty. If you are like me and your brain just continuously doubts and questions and scrutinizes everything, you come to a conclusion at some point that you and all your doubting is a very mechanism that, perpetuates all this. You doubt the world. You doubt the circumstance that birthed and made you. You have doubts about your own being. In a lot of essence, you should. Maybe the mechanism that thinks all of this is just bad and needs to be fixed and mended somehow, well, maybe that's the start of all the problems. What in the world that we put out, is going to withstand the test of time? Do we realize that it's all just kind of a sandcastle in a lot of ways, and everything just keeps going on the way it does? There's a lot of people saying it's as if we passed away at some point a couple years ago, and we're just unaware of the fact that we're living in hell. Well, that's a very astute observation in a lot of ways. You could say metaphorically and symbolically, yeah, that kind of is what happened. The human genome and the human psyche shifted so dramatically into this extreme play in the architecture of our civilizations. We became embedded in the walls of everything that we built and obsessed. We don't see that the reason and the cause behind a lot of the suffering that we have is we're trying to preserve this quality and this experience of life that we're all going through. And we've been enraptured and ensnared in this kind of illusory mirage of what the world is through our artificial architecture. We're inlaid in the temple we built for ourselves. But, the thing about temples is they usually secondarily act as tombs. And oftentimes they become more confining, little boxes for the living to live as though they're already dead in. There's something to be said about that, the innate quality of this being we call human. We've always kind of questioned life, pondered death, pondered everything about, what it is to be alive and what it is to exist in the world. Maybe the entire process and purpose of life is an experience of, going through this entire world as, a witness to it all. Maybe it's like this body, it's just holding the entire experience. Maybe it's more like a spacesuit with an inlaid architecture in itself, built to represent a character. And maybe we navigate the world through these characters and these experiences. And it's just that simple. It's nothing worth clinging on to. It's nothing worth holding on to. You're just a body. You're an avatar. You're a spirit in a body, not a body with a spirit. We have the whole thing kind of backwards anyway. And it's always been backwards for a prolonged period of time from how our more ancestral lineages understood the world and why they picked up spiritual practices in the first place. The concept of what figures like Jesus spoke about, the kingdom of heaven is within man. He was saying that the body itself is a temple that holds the essence of the spirit within it. And in that way, in that sense, the body itself is really the only architecture that life really needs. The body, like all the different other species on the planet, you'll notice, we're a little different than the animals, but we still have biological instincts. We have the capacity to think and self-reflect on our actions and the trajectory of what we set into motion. That's a unique blessing, and at the same time, it's a unique curse. It depends on how you look at it. Maybe that's where the dualism starts. We're like halfway between heaven and halfway between hell. And what we put into motion in the world, there's actions that ripple out as a consequence of that. So really what we set into motion in the world, it perpetuates and plays out through this field of novelty, this story we call life. And we're just witnessing it. We're moving through an organic and inorganic, a matter-based architecture that really is just energy in motion. It's just a story playing out through matter. What exists in us that animates the body, that animates life, that animates biology? It's a mystery. It cannot be explained. It just happens. Kind of like how gravity just happens. How does light bend? How are there points in space that, are so dense that not even light can escape them? We could spend a multiplicity of lifetimes trying to assess through our human lens and perspective what and why the world exists the way it does. And still will only ever come to a conclusion that we're putting into words and ultimately communicating into a vast, open, not necessarily empty, but full and total ether, a thing we call the void. Maybe we should just stop referring to it in a kind of like nihilistic context, because the reality is, a thing we call a void, it's full of everything. It's wholly and totally full. The space in which all things inhabit, it's energy pushing matter. It's energy animating matter. The entire thing, it's just a cosmic play. It's a cosmic stage. We get to be these beings and these embodiments for a brief period of time to witness and experience the play. That's what it is. There are different spiritual figures that have existed throughout time that postulated these ideas, different comedians too, that postulate the same ideas, and it's ironic because they all come to like the same kind of conclusion. Buddha said, the world is Maya. It's an illusion. world is inherently suffering. You, as a biological organism, experience all ranges of emotions and psychological states that come with the human body, but you're always the witness underneath that all that just experiences it. So, in a lot of ways, life comes with inherent suffering. In that aspect, it is kind of hell. But at the same time, life has tremendous beauty in it. And in that essence, it's a heaven. It comes with a myriad of colors on a spectrum that you can experience and witness, a myriad of sounds, a myriad of sensations, a myriad of things that you can enjoy or dislike. And you have total, well, to a degree, if we're being honest, free will and the ability to have these experiences throughout your life. But life exists on a conveyor belt of story and storytelling. And that story has pushed humanity progressively into this huge spanning narrative about the world being the equivalent of a living cemetery that's always under this storm of conflict and war and avarice and greed over its own continued perpetuation and existence. In a lot of ways, our world is not heaven nor hell. It's like a melding of the two and everything in between. Buddha also spoke about the idea of bardo states. They are like in-betweens, limbos. Well, in a lot of ways, the world is, in itself, another limbo. It's like limbo. Maybe this in itself is what they call the realm of hungry ghosts. Do you notice that everything that you put and imbibe in your body, it's just a fleeting level of satisfaction only to be replaced by that same state of emptiness? It's not satiated until death. What is death? Why are we afraid? The idea of death and dying is because we put a bunch of Halloween level boogeyman iconography and symbolism on it. Are we terrified of the spookiness? Well, all of that is a projection of the mind too. The iconography and symbolism of everything that we, stir up in our minds. It gives aspects of things that exist that are downright eldritch and terrifying at times, borderline demonic, and those exist. But that same mechanism of imagination gives birth to whimsical, fantastic, beautiful things. It's just what you focus your attention on in the mind that shapes and creates your image and your idea of the world. And a lot of people living in this world that are on the world and in the world, they're like, well, that's just fantasy. I'm a realist. Okay, how real is the world and the concepts of the world around you that you have seen playing out in the last couple decades? Is any of it real? The majority of it, people are realizing it's lies and scams. So it's not really that real, is it? It's just a story. The whole thing's a story. No matter what you believe and no matter what you follow and no matter what you practice and no matter what you preach, it's all just a story. So there has to be an underlying aspect that connects all that story. What exists beyond that? The silent, witnessing awareness of all things. It's an empty field of space, but it's living and breathing through us, embodying us, surrounding and encompassing us. And like the Buddha said, the world is Maya. It's an illusion. It's just a temporary dance of energy colliding with matter to have an experience. What's this world's experience? Somewhere between heaven and somewhere between hell. In a lot of ways, it's a symbiotic balance that seems so chaotic and dysfunctional that it doesn't make any sense. But the reality is it's perfectly imperfect and imperfectly perfect. It doesn't exist on a spectrum of our moral ideas and beliefs. It's beyond that. things happen and flow and progress in a way where life and death are constantly cycling between one another. And it's just creating and destroying and giving birth again, destroying again. And it's just a continuous, perpetual cycle of that. And in reality, all that's ever happening is energy is dancing in matter. And where energy dissipates when we die, well, that energy can't be created nor destroyed. It just transforms. Maybe it just goes back to that state and quality that's already holding everything together. Maybe there are things in between that are beyond our capacity and understanding. Everything being a byproduct of our mind and our imagination, what we produce and what we see in the world, what we've colored the world in with, what we've drawn boundaries on, what we've drawn parameters on. It's a formality of containment to make us feel comfortable and safe in our understanding of the world. But if you ever step outside the box of what the world is and what civilization is in this modern time period, you immediately begin to realize the entire thing is just Willy Wonka's fucking chocolate factory. It's a big, ridiculous version of super jail in a lot of ways. It's lame. I mean, that's just my opinion, but it's pretty fucking lame. It's a big casino and jail cell and cemetery and factory floor and plantation. That's pretty much what Earth is in this modern paradigm. So maybe the reality is not too far from what people are saying. Maybe it's just shifted into a time period and progression in the story where the aspects of the more hellish nature, the matter and material, are overtaking the heavenly nature. But the entirety of life is a balancing act. It synergistically flows back and forth in a repeating cycle. The hell and the matter, if it gets too imbalanced, it basically parasitizes and cannibalizes itself and destroys itself in the process. And then what replaces it? Nature continues to grow and flourish through whatever means and paths and avenues are available to it. Life continues in one way or one aspect or another. Even on Mars, there's bacteria. Even on a dead planet, there's life slowly progressing in ways that we will never see in our lifetime. So to think this is just a big, dead, empty thing, existence, that's selling it very, very short. That's a very human lens and perspective take on it all. The human being is just an avatar of life. It is, in essence, a ghost walking in a biological suit. It's a skeleton with skin. It's a character in a story. It is an animated, living corpse. And that's nothing to really be afraid of. That's nothing to get all up in arms about. The preservation of life should be, one important thing to us. But we have to stop and ponder and consider why it is that we preserve life in the first place. There's an innate quality of nurturing in us, compassion in us. To exist without that disconnects you from life and makes you destructive. So that quality speaks for itself. If our innate nature is just shut down, tuned out, and turned off, what are we to fall into but, a steady state of perpetually dying slowly? But in that process, can you still find a quality that gives love and compassion to the people that you interact with, or the state of being that you're in? And in that, does the worry about things sometimes dissolve? You ever just watch a sunset? The experiences that we experience in life can be hard, brutal at times, disturbing. That doesn't have to decide and determine your character, how you hold yourself through life, and how you walk through life. The reality of the experience is we don't make it out of this alive, regardless of what we do. The world's just a big cemetery. It's a big, living, breathing cemetery. And more aptly put, maybe that in itself is too human a perspective. Maybe the reality is that life's a garden. Life's a garden that gives bloom to life. And when life can no longer sustain itself, it breaks down back to the elements and components to be reabsorbed and churned out in a new way. There was a time where there were creatures on this planet that we didn't even believe existed, or told didn't exist, existed. You know, things like the dinosaurs, things like whatever the sea was churning out during those times, all the leviathans and monstrosities that it created, that we would see them as. But you know, life was playing a game through biology and creating these fantastic, almost mythical beasts. In a lot of ways, sometimes I like to imagine that our mythology of dragons just came from a misunderstanding and a misconstruing of what dinosaurs were. Or maybe that was the mythic symbolism that bridges the gaps. Why is it, in that circumstance, something that I like to ponder and think about, because I really love dragons, why do we have an innate kind of spiritual connection encoded within us that loves these kind of mythical, fantastical things? These monsters, these beasts, things like that. Is it kind of not only just psychologically and physically encoded in us, but like spiritually encoded in us? Is that an indicator that life and biological life just kind of recycles itself through a continuous looping repetition of biology deteriorating and then coming back in different ways, broke down by the elements and then reshaped and remolded and reformed in different ways? You know, here's a funny thing that I always thought about. Maybe this is a modern lens and perspective. And I know the world is going through extreme things right now, but something to lighten the load on your mind. You know, we all like games. Life's just a big game at this point. We love video games, and we know that games progress in stages and levels. Well, there's a lot of things going on outside of Earth, you know, in the cosmos, that we have no fucking clue and idea about. And the fact that everything is just energy playing through matter, maybe we don't remain contained and confined to this one state of matter and material when we die. What if the entire cosmos is set up like kind of energetic clockwork that's flowing and spiraling so chaotically it seems imperfect, but all the while it's just one giant game, like one giant progressing dream that's playing out. And Earth, maybe Earth is just one of many stages. Maybe it's the first stage. Maybe it's the last stage. But it being the last, just kind of in the same way death presumes there will be life, leads to another game. It's not a whole lot of complexity to think about. I mean, we've been raised in this in our entire lives, and ideas have been transmuted through the imagination and all the mediums that we have created that give credence to these ideas. They're the same ideas recycled over and over and over again, just in different ways, different aspects. They're different stories with the same progressive level of our understanding through the human lens and perspective through them. And they give birth to all kinds of fantastical, whimsical things. Well, Earth, it's alarming and scary. It's a lot. A lot of it plays out like a big horror show, you know, at least where we are right now. But a lot of Earth's history is horrific. Well, this world and how it has worked and functioned throughout its history, it's been like a giant garden that, when humans propagated it, became this big game of war, this big game of sacrifice and fighting and conflict. But all that was ever under that, was the same biological, alchemical garden that just pumps and churns out life through the elements. It's just the human story is playing out and unfolding on top of that. Much like the dinosaurs, the other beings that existed before our time, the base element and raw material of what planet Earth is and always has been is just going to continue doing what it's doing until it can no longer do it. And then what? Well, even that deteriorates and whittles down and returns back to the same bits and pieces and components that created it in the first place. Becomes essentially stardust. Everything is a production of elements just being birthed into this void, this ether, and they're all just playing out. It's not a super complicated concept. It's just we don't really have ways to define and describe it because it's such a all-encompassing force playing out. It goes beyond what we can describe. And maybe the point isn't to describe it all. Maybe it's something that's supposed to just be experienced. And that's the hard part. All our conflict and arguing and bickering and quarreling and warfare and fighting is over disputes and disagreements of how it all started to begin with. But all those stories simultaneously are playing out in the same universe, the same ether, and they're all united. Ironically, as divided as they are, they're all united on the level playing field of what this is, what everything is. The game is not complex. It's as complex as you make it. And we're born into bodies that give different levels of complexity to this world. The hardest part of that complexity is finding a medium and a balance and a center that balances it all so that we don't go around acting like total fucking lunatics and buffoons. Kind of hard to do these days, but not impossible. If I understand that the quality of my life from this point forward is going to be a game of things just steadily progressing into worse and worse circumstances, does it do me any good to worry and fret and be afraid of what is going to befall me if I know at the very end of everything, regardless of what I do, I'm going to die